Hey, this is Tiger. Welcome to my stream on May the 4th. May the 4th be with you, the ACD Radar. May I may I say something about May the 4th? AJ Black, good evening. Spectre, hey, a new intro. Yes, a new intro that I prepared for when I actually was recording a not live video for an ambassador event that was already announced as such for the days in the upcoming week after the roadmap stream, but the details have not been confirmed yet. And so if that plays out as intended, then expect a Tigerways video with their official ambassador event next week. Maybe this might actually block out our Sunday night stream, but we will see how this plays out. And for that I built this little intro so that I'm not so reliant anymore on any game intro. Actually, wow, suspect. Yeah. Yeah. Today we are checking out the Mittenwaldbahn. If I find my stuff again here in my quite confused OBS, the Mittenwaldbahn, and this is a key that I got actually for free from DTG by virtue of the ambassador program. Thanks for that. But what I'm saying and doing is still my own stuff, so if you don't like it, then you have to complain to me, not to DTG. It is a nice route. It is quite heavy on the system with a bit of FPS issues sometimes. But what I like about it is that they go back in time and present us with an Indusi 60 implementation on the original version of the Bavaria 110 and with the Deutsche Krokodil Lokomotive, the ÖBB 1020. What is a nicely implemented thing with the possibility to go into the engine room and play around with the pneumatic valves for the brake system and stuff. A lot of it is actually simulated. So a nice DLC altogether. If you like mountainous routes that are not so fast to drive, but that are fun to drive because it is always getting up and down and you have to adjust your braking and accelerating to not jump about speed-wise. So those three locomotives you can find on the Mittenwaldbahn, the Baureihe 111 that we already had for the last 2 weeks, in the later version in Verkehrsrot, and with a full-blown System PZB 90 Zugsicherung. We will talk about the different versions later a bit. And you have obviously the Deutsche Krokodil, ÖBB 1020, what I said, and the Niedertalbahn layers over with the 365. Theodoros, hello Fox, he says, and hello to you, Theodoros. Very nice to have you on board again. Yeah, I wanted to use my beloved 110, and there are several services, and I wanted to pick a service that takes us all the way from Garmisch-Partenkirchen to Mittenwald. Maybe go in August with light clouds before we actually jump into it. Already a little introduction of today's presentation so that we just know where we are driving about, because that gives me always a lot of additional background. Oh, it's the second one? No, it's that one. See, we've talked about all the different ways to get from Germany to Austria and vice versa with a railway, and I've seen that there are not so super many possibilities to do that, and that at least 3 of them are in the game, or exactly 3 of them are in the game. That is in the west, the Lindau-Lochau-Hörbrand on the Vorarlberg S-Bahn DLC. Then 2 weeks ago we went from Freilassing to Salzburg, what is an important border crossing for the trains going from Munich to Vienna typically. That was in the Salzburg Rosenheim. And now we are talking about Mittenwald-Scharnitz, what is a less important border crossing through the Alps, or parts of the Alps, and on a single track like all the others, except for the Kiefersfeld and Kufstein, what is probably the most important one when you want to get from Munich to the south, especially to Italy. Then you would probably go Kiefersfeld and Kufstein. Spectre says Kiefersfeld and Kufstein would be extremely nice, right? Yeah, maybe we will get this. It is actually not so out of the way. We will see that. Yeah, Mittenwaldbahn is in the 1989 setting, or early 90s maybe. If you look at it on the map, what I have did, what I what I have done, then you can see here, this is the area between Upper Bavaria and Austria, more or less. You can see the Starnberger See, the Chiemsee, and this is where our Mittenwaldbahn is located. We are starting at Garmisch-Partenkirchen, going to the east and then bending down to the south, going to Mittenwald. This is all the area that we know from ski jumping. If you're into that, CD Radar, never underestimate less important crossings. No, we don't. Spectre says, but DTG don't do extensions. Well, it can be a thing of its own, actually. That wouldn't be the problem, I think. Yeah. And then we're going here between those 2 mountains or parts of the Alps. That is the Karwendelgebirge in the east, and the Wettersteingebirge in the west. You can see the Zugspitze here, the highest mountain in Germany, just still in Germany. And then we are crossing here between Karwendel and Wetterstein and going into the Inntal, Seefeld, and then we are running here a bit higher than the A12, I think it is, the motorway in the Inntal, and along the Inntal to Innsbruck. And then you can see, if you follow the Inntal, the river Inn, it would take you here through Austria, and then you get actually to Kufstein, Kiefersfelden. So we could touch the Inn again. And what is funny when talking about the Inn, if you follow the Inn on its way until it actually merges with the Danube at Passau, we are passing Rosenheim here. So if you think back 2 weeks ago when you're starting at Rosenheim, in the Rosenheim-Salzburg DLC, you typically go left when leaving the station, and then you go down and pass across a river on a bridge where there is a limit to 80, I think. And this is the Inn again, so the same river that we are actually hogging to here at Innsbruck. So everything is connected. That will be then the Rosenheim-Salzburg, where you go to Bad Endorf, and then you hug the Chiemsee, Prien, Bernau am Chiemsee, Übersee, then Traunstein, how did I forget the name, Teisendorf, Freilassing, and then to Salzburg. Theodorus, visiting Mittenwald would be one of my bucket list if I ever visit Europe. Why not? At least you can see it in the virtual implementation, and then just come over. But let me know when you're coming over, then there will be probably a way to meet up somehow. What's also interesting is that on this part of the map, you find quite the sites of at least 3 of the more severe and tragic railway accidents that happened in Bavaria since the millennium, since the year 2000. Garmisch-Partenkirchen, if you are going the other way out of the station that we are going here for our run today, then you get to Burg Rhein-Fachand, where we had this derailment in, I think, 2022, where a formation with a 111 pulling Dosto cars, so quite much the same that we have here in the Rosenheim Salzburg DLC, quite a similar formation, derailed. The investigation is still going on, but according to the preliminary reports, it is because the concrete sleepers actually disintegrated and the rail tilted to the side and could not support the bogies of one of the Doster cars anymore, and so there was this derailment. Bad Aibling, here next to Rosenheim, if you leave the Rosenheim station into a different direction, was this tragic accident with a head-on collision of two S-Bahn trains that was due to a traffic dispatcher putting as a Satzsignal, so a supplementary or surrogate signal that allowed one of the trains passing a red signal, but the signal was red for a reason, because there was a train coming up that single track section from the other end, and so they collided with, I think, 12 people dead. That is Bad Aibling here close to Rosenheim, and got this traffic dispatcher prison sentence of about 3.5 years, if I remember correctly. And third, just on the border here, we have Ebenhausen-Schäftlarn, where we had this quite interesting accident where one of the drivers, a Quereinsteiger, so someone who came to the job after he did something else before, insisted on starting his train a couple of times after he got a penalty brake. And one of the penalty brakes he got from running a red signal into this unidirectional section. And I think one person died and a lot of people got injured. This guy got a suspended prison sentence only a couple of months ago. Yeah, I'm always talking about railway accidents because it always teaches us a lot about what can go wrong and why we are doing certain things that we do, actually. So, but nicer stuff. We are going on a very scenic drive from Garmisch-Partenkirchen here to Kleis. This is Kleis, where we switch over and down to Mittenwald, what is approximately here. Then we cross the border to Scharnitz, and then we go on the Austrian part between Karwendel and Wetterstein to Seefeld in Tirol, and then down the decline until we hit Innsbruck. So, let's get the presentation out of the way and start with our service. Like the one that I already picked, this one, light clouds, August, dynamic weather. Let's see where it gets us. Driver mode, obviously. It's rated for 1.5 hours, actually, so expect the stream to be quite longish. Always takes a bit until we're actually loaded in properly. So here we are. Zulässige Geschwindigkeit, maximum authorized speed 160. Here is our main switch. And there is no door control on this locomotive here. That means actually we will have a guard operating the doors. What do we need to do? We need to switch on the headlights, and we need to go over to the other cab to turn on the Indusi and the SIFA. You can see that the livery is the original ocean blue and beige that those locos got when they were first built. Here is, you can see it's not PZB, it's Indusi. The SIFA is SIFA, just as we know it. And we have these nice silver coaches, Silberlinge. What is about the first train setup that I remember as a very small child. They were using those cars. Unlock the brakes, apply the loco brakes, and then I think the light is on already in this locomotive. Door control is with those vierkant thingies, where you just use this key with a square head to close the doors. Sicherheitsfahrschaltung, yes. That's what the SIFA is. And let's see if I forgot anything or if our train is actually starting. No, we are starting. Into the mountains. We get an old semaphore signal, not with a round blade, but with a square blade. Exiting with 40. And the SH1 in the old version is also allowing us to pass. So, Spectre, yeah, interesting that the passenger trains are all classified as Alps, even the long distance ones. Maybe they are downgraded on the last part of their journey. Maybe they are. I've actually wondered that too, but I am not too firm about how they organized their trains at the time. I find it hard to believe that they downgrade services halfway, so to say. So now we're already going into a bit of an incline. Rangierhalttafel. We see a lot of signals for the snowplow on the German side as well as on the Austrian side. So now we should be out and should be allowed to accelerate to the 60 line speed. You can see the ski jump installation here. Garmisch, Mittenwald, Innsbruck. And this is what happens if you don't pay attention to what your drive is doing. I was just tapping and thinking I just increased it to one little thing, but it actually rolled up to 27. BU1 flashing, that means all good. We can just roll over. Isn't it beautiful? Verschubfahrten, says Spectre. Yes, but here in this DLC it is actually correct from what I've seen. They use Rangierfahrten on the German side and Verschubfahrten on the Austrian side. What might be due to the fact that it is a TSG product, Train Sim Germany, so they can actually handle German language and the difference between Austrian and German expressions. And Theodoros, this route is set in 1989 apparently, so it was still West Germany. Do West and East use the same safety systems? Nice that you ask. I will come back to this in my presentation about the different versions of the Indusi. And No, there was actually a genuine system in the German Democratic Republic that was developed in the 1980s, the PZ80 system, that was more advanced than the PZB I60 system that was used in West Germany at the time. And after the reunification, it was both amalgamated into the then PZB 90 system. Pfeiftafel. For this level crossing here. So we're going uphill until we get to Kleis. At Kleis we are going downhill a bit to Mittenwald, and from Mittenwald we more or less climb to Seefeld in Tirol, and then from that we are going downhill. That is more or less the general layout. Yeah, we will get back to this in the presentation, but the Indusi system was developed in the 1930s actually, so at the time when there was still the German Reich. And well, this came to an end during the war, World War II, and afterwards they had to get it rolling again. So in the West they put it up as Indusi 54 and then Indusi 60, while in the East they were quite reluctant to use this stuff, and it was not before end of the 60s maybe that they started to use the old I60 installations again. They even had a Romanian version of it, and then came up with the PZ80. And Spectre says that reminds me of the fact that there were fixed border controls between Germany and Austria until the mid-90s. Yep, we will actually see one of those border checkpoints when we are crossing over to Schäftlarn, where you could stop people and ask them whether they are transporting any cigarettes or booze, more Strohrum than they are allowed to. So in real life the Bundesgrenzschutz and his Austrian equivalent would walk through the trains at the border station. Yeah. We are too. You see, our Indusi thingy, that looks a bit different than our PZB 90 thingy, lit 1000 Hertz lamp, because we are approaching an area where we can actually pass or overtake another train. Yeah, in 1989 we were really close to reunification, but it was still two separate German countries. Can turn off my blowers. So, gotta be careful a bit, because at the end of this passing area there can actually be a red signal, since we got the Halt erwarten VR0 at the entrance. Here's again a snowplow signal, but I think it looks good yet. Yes. Signal is green. So we can run through. $60. Snowplow up, snowplow down. Oh. I got into the Z-Bereich. This river looks a bit, or this creek looks a bit super straight. Here is a short dip where we're going downhill. So if you tap your A and D keys for the power control really shortly, then you can switch it by one notch. Thanks again, Vitaly, for this hint. This helps a lot. But you also have to keep your counter in view, otherwise you might miss that you switched it into run up and hold, what does not exist according to my sources on this locomotive. It should always fall back into the running setup. Office desk view. Did I share my desktop? No. I've even seen one of those cows walking about. Yeah, see, it actually moved. They are not just sitting still or just chewing. They're actually moving about. Oh, I missed the increase to 70 here. Here's the decrease to 60 again. So well. Ah, yes, Theodoros, now I get it. So, now we're running into Kleis. Again, we got a VR2. And Theodoros meant that he envies the drivers that have those scenery at their views. Well, that is really one of the most beautiful sceneries that you can expect. That you can hope for. So already managed to lose 1.5 minutes. Because of admiring the scenery. So, this is Kleis. Here starts a very scenic route into this Hochtal here. And they have an Easter egg here that is called Finkensteiner Ösi Benzinel for this gas station. For whatever reason they got the texture on the wrong way about so that it is all mirrored. And CD Radar says, yeah, I mean the view is nice, but when you must wake up at 4 AM for the 6th day in a row, the view can be even nicer. Yes, I know. And just imagine it is just raining and you're not seeing anything. And it's just cold and annoying. So, now we are more or less turning to the right and south and running towards Mittenwald. Here the proof spectre for the Rangierhalttafel. It actually says für Rangierfahrten. So well done, TSG. Accelerate to 60, don't forget the honking. And HA wants a drive-by. That was a nice spot for a drive-by. I see we will have so much delay. Now we're going uphill sharpish. Of course, as Theodorus, as humans, we're all gonna get bored cranky at some time. That is true. But not because it's not the view's fault at any rate. And see the radars, and then in the summer when it's 1,000,000 degrees outside and 4 times then that in the cabin and there's no air conditioning and an open window only blows warmer air in. I guess I just look for the negative in everything. Yeah, don't do that. But I get you. We don't need to envy the drivers here. Now I need to slow down actually because there is a 40 coming up. And it's just around the corner here. And we can go 60 again, but obviously have to pass with the whole of our train. AJ says, I love this forest. Yeah, it's beautiful, isn't it? Now we're going downhill sharpish. Can accelerate to 160. 160 to 60 without the 1. See, the radar says the so-called frame rate forest. Well, I have not been able to really figure out what is so heavy on the FPS. It must be something with the shadows, because if there is no light, then it is definitely smoother. I fiddled around a bit with the settings in the engine ini. Interesting fact is also that on those silver coaches we only have non-smoker cars, whereas on the beige and ocean blue intercity coaches we have only smoker cars. Spectre's Gen 8 console has left the group. Well, you sometimes can turn around in those DLCs with those mountains and, like with a Geiger counter, see in what direction the frame rate suddenly drops. So I think that there is some room for optimization still. Because there must be a lot of calculating going on in an area that you can actually not see. And Theodorus' game companies these days, in my opinion, they kinda make included demands for newer hardware. Probably. But actually the weather and light setting has a huge impact on the performance and the FPS. Coming into Mittenwald. Halt erwarten. The timetable is sometimes a bit weird in this DLC though. There are some services where you are supposed to arrive at the next stop even at a time earlier than when you left at the station before. Some services you spat out as soon as you're loading in. Marty McFly was a train driver, yes. Back to the Future. What is also quite nice here, and unfortunately I don't have enough time to do this live, but you can see that there is a Seilbahn, the cable car, announced, and I've tried it. If you follow those markers, don't know exactly where they are now, but you just have to follow those markers along, and then you actually get to the station of this cable car thingy. You cannot use the cable car, obviously. Here. But you can walk all the way. There is no invisible wall that stops you from getting there. And here you can see the cables at any rate. You can walk over the bridge and around those bends, and it will take you here to this place. Where the sign tells you that you are not allowed to cross the tracks for the Seilbahn if you are not authorized. Well, whatever. At any rate, you can get there. I've not checked out if this is possible at other stations as well, where you have some sites. And Hero says, no offense, but I get why people over there yodel. Look at that scene. Yes, I will spare you my yodeling. But it's definitely a beautiful spot, right? But before we get too much into yodeling, I will present you with my presentation for today about the origins of the PZB 90 by looking at the Indusi I-60 system that we have on this train, especially as far as I was able to find out how it is supposed to work, especially the differences to the PZB 90 system that we all are so familiar with. Let's first have a look at the underlying idea and the principle of our PZB, Punktförmige Zugbeeinflussung, and many other safety systems as well. This is our track. That was a great invention that we had, a railway track, where we can run railway vehicles along. That made things so much easier. But as long as, or as soon as you have two railway vehicles or more on the same track, then you get the problem that you have to organize the traffic. So it was a big improvement that you started to use signals that allowed the passage or forbid the passage of railway vehicles. Before that, you just put up a man there with a flag and wave and hope that the train driver actually sees the guy or interprets correctly what the guy is telling him. So signals that can show stop and go were a great thing. The other problem is that you cannot just rely on stop and go signals if you go a bit faster, because then you can't you can't stop your train anymore. So distance signals was another great invention, where you can give the driver a warning that she or he has to stop at the next signal. This is why we in Germany still have this very rigid distance signal, main signal system with typically a fixed distance, in the mountains a bit shorter, but typically 1,000 meters on most of the primary railways. I've put the old signals up here with the semaphore blades, but you can also see that the night signals, red light, two diagonally arranged yellow lights, are already the signals that we would use still nowadays in the HV system. Distance signal, main signal. And then how does the train protection system attack at this point? A warning is a great thing to warn the driver that the next signal is red, but if the driver misses the warning, then it was all for nothing. So one thing that we can attack is that the driver does not miss the warning, like Integra Signum, like AWS in Great Britain, like the crocodile system. This is where we attack at first. We have to make sure the driver got the warning. And how do we do that? We put some sort of device in the track that the train can pick up, and then the driver has to acknowledge by pressing a key or something. Otherwise, the train initiates a penalty brake and stops the train, so that the driver can wake up and think back what he should have done, or call someone, or that an incapacitated driver can be rescued and something can be saved. So that is the first thing that a lot of safety systems do. As soon as there is a warning, the driver has to acknowledge, otherwise the train does the job and stops to prevent further harm. The other thing that we can do, and attack at the main signals, we can put up a signal there. If the train picks it up, then it initiates a penalty brake at once, because the train is not supposed to pass the signal. Problem always is that we cannot prevent the train from running the signal, but we can mitigate the effect and stop the train in a reasonable distance afterwards. But we see the first thing, we need to be able to distinguish those two signals, so that the train can know where it actually is and what signal it is that the driver should have reacted to and didn't for whatever reason. We can think back of the ZSI, the Zugsicherung Induktive 90 system that we have on the Arosa line, for example, and the Bernina Linie in the implementation in the game, where we had to turn around those magnets to distinguish those situations. Very clever. But we see we will have to do that. And then if we divide our approach to the red signal in by two lines in three phases, actually, then we come up with things or terms that we have seen with ETCS. We can do, when we are able, and this is one of the prerequisites for our PZB and Indusi system, to check the actual speed of the train versus a predefined speed. And so we do speed control. And there are typically three phases of speed control. One is the ceiling speed control, where we can check that the train does not go faster than it is actually allowed to go under the best of circumstances. Between a warning signal, a signal that requires the driver to react, either to stop or to slow down the speed, we have some sort of a target speed control where I have to lower the speed and check out if we can do this effectively. And then at a certain point we would have a release speed control, where the speed is so low that we cannot interfere with target speed anymore, but we have to rely on the driver. If we would control him down to zero with this Punktförmige approach, where we only get a signal into the train at certain spots, then we could never allow the train to run again, because even if the signal is improving, the train does not know. So we need at some point to hand it over to the driver to go with a slow enough speed that nothing bad happens, and rely on the driver to only go on if the signal improved. So we find those three segments in ETCS still, just as we have them in almost all safety systems. Ceiling speed control, under the best of circumstances, then target speed control if we have the driver to react to something, slow down or stop, and then a release speed control in the phase where it is up to the driver to pass or not pass a signal. At least ETCS level 1, where we rely on balises, has the same idea. So, ceiling speed control, we know that from our PZB 90, with 165 for PZB-O, 125 PZB-M, and 105 for PZB-U trains. I'm actually not super sure at what point we got the ceiling speed control in our Indusi system. If it was there from the beginning or if it was added at some point. The sources did not tell me that, but we still have, this is something in PZB 90 system, ceiling speed control, where the train is according to the second to those settings controlled in the best of circumstances. And then if the train is going faster, then the system will slow down the train with a releasable penalty brake, so that we don't need to stop, but the train is just slowed down so that we drop underneath the ceiling speed here. So what do we do after we get a warning? In the Indusi 60, as it is described in many sources, especially on the one that is used for the Wikipedia entry in German, we distinguish between the three modes, the O, M, and U. O for typically passenger trains, M for typically freight trains, and U for the most heavy freight trains. We distinguish. We have here a control that kicks in 20 seconds after the driver or the train got the impulse from this magnet here, from this device. 20 seconds, you need to be below 95. You can see the time is different and the target speed is different from what we know from PZB 90. So we have 85 to aim for, 80 actually, because we always need to be 5 kilometers underneath, so that we have a margin of error, and we have slightly more time in PZB 90 to achieve that. For the M in Indusi 60, as it is described here, you would have 26 seconds to slow down to 75 and 34 seconds to slow down to 65 or below in PZB U. So you can see this is only a timer that is running here. Our whole safety system relies mainly on three things: that we can get signals into the train telling the train where it is, at what signal the train is at the moment. Then we can do speed checks, compare the actual speed versus a predefined speed, and then we can run a timer, so that after the signal that we get here, we do speed control starting at a certain point in time after we got the influencing from this 1000 Hertz magnet here. So in between, in the Indusi I-60 system, and that seems quite clear to me, there is no brake curve control, unlike the PZB 90. The PZB 90 that runs with microprocessors, computers that can calculate a brake curve, will calculate a brake curve from the 165 down to the 85 after the predefined length of time. And so you can get a penalty brake even before this time has elapsed. Unlike in the Indusi I-60, here you can do whatever you want as long as you get your speed down or under the predefined maximum after the timer has elapsed. Then you have the speed control constantly going on, and then you can get a penalty brake. But if you brake like going on and then brake sharply underneath, that's up to you. Downside obviously is the system cannot realize before the timer has elapsed that the train is actually going much too fast, and that it is probably not able anymore to make it below the predefined limit at this point. If you read the TSG manual, they tell you that for all three modes the timer runs 34 seconds and then needs to be below 95, 75 or 65 respectively. So this is a bit of a difference between the TSG manual for this route and the sources that you can find, especially on the wiki entry and the sources that they name as their sources. So I don't, it is totally possible that this has been changed during time, so that the program was actually adjusted a bit. So the times and speeds were adjusted. I'm not actually sure what is the correct setting for an Indusi I-60 in the year 1989 at this point. But probably the implementation has a timer for 34. Since we are not really running M or U trains on this DLC, it does not make such a big difference. We can only check it out if we get an influencing and slow down to 95. Since we can't go 95 or faster on this route, we will never find out. Actually, we would have to take this route in free roam to a different route where we can use this effectively. And then, obviously, the problem is, if we do this, we can check that the train slowed down a bit from the top speed within the timer, but we still don't know if it is still braking and slowing down, if it is still, if it is keeping the slowdown on, or if it is actually just now running the signal with 95 at this point. So we want a second checkpoint, and this is typically the 500 Hertz magnet here that we put here up. And at this point, the system checks again against a predefined speed. On an O train, according to the wiki source, it would be at 65, 50 and 40. And this is something that we also know from our PZB 90 program already. And what the TSG manual tells you, that it is always checking against the speed of 40 at the 500 Hertz magnet. So again, there is a slight difference, but again, caveat, maybe this was just changed during time and different versions here. But the general idea is you have 2 points where you check the speed. The first one here, after a timer has elapsed, and it is only a timer. We don't know how far the train has traveled in that length of time until the timer has elapsed. And then a second check, a second point where we check it, and this is at the 500 Hertz magnet, and this is obviously at the predefined distance to the brake, to the main signal where we have to stop. In the beginning, the distance here was actually smaller than we are used to. Under PZB in 90, it was more like 150 meters at the time, as compared to 250 more like in the PZB 90 regime, but still the same idea. 2 spots where we check the time, and this is our rudimentary brake curve here. And at the same time, after this magnet, we have the release speed where the train can pass the signal in case it gets improved, and we hand it over to the driver to do this responsibly. Otherwise, we will get a penalty brake if this speed is not met. So actually 4 points where we take action and control. The first one is we control that the driver got the warning by pressing the Wachsamkeitstaste, the acknowledgement key, and then 2 points where we check the speed, the slowing down, our rudimentary brake curve from wherever we started after a timer for the 1000 Hertz, and then at the second time for the 500 Hertz, and then we check for any movement at the active magnet at the red main signal. And how can we achieve it? That the train gets those signals from the magnets. Obviously, we put a receiver underneath the train. And how does this actually work? They're always called magnets, but actually they are not necessarily magnets. We have this thing in the train, and in the beginning it was actually built in a way that you had an electric circuit with an alternator creating an alternating current of a certain frequency, like 1000 Hertz, and this was sent through a coil. There are some more things in, but this is the general thing. You have a coil with an alternating current of 1000 hertz in it. There must be a capacitor in this thing to work, I think, but this is the idea. One current with alternating current 1000 hertz, and at the same time you have one with 500 and one with 2000 hertz. So 3 currents with different frequencies in your alternating current. Later then this was amalgamated together in one generator that can do all 3 frequencies in one coil, but this is easier to understand. You have 3 separate currents in this train device, and they are constantly running their current and therefore constantly emitting an electromagnetic field of those 3 frequencies: 500 hertz, 1000 hertz and 2000 hertz. Constantly, all the time. And as soon as there is a corresponding device in the track, this electromagnetic field hits this device, and in this device there is also a coil. This coil is connected with a capacitor, and therefore it is a resonating circuit, Resonanzstromkreis, LC circuit. LC, L for the inductor here in the coil and C for the capacitor, and this results in induction. So the electromagnetic field induces a current, and it induces a current that corresponds with the frequency of those thingies up here. And by changing or choosing the magnitude of this capacitor and this coil, you can tune those circuits to a certain frequency. So it does not pick up any alternating current, but it picks up the alternating current that it is tuned to. So it picks either the 1000 hertz, the 500 hertz, or the 2000 hertz. And if that happens, and so you can distribute those frequencies to your 3 different magnets here. And it was convention that the 1000 hertz signal was put up at the distant signal, the 500 hertz then at this spot a couple of 100 meters before the main signal, and the 2000 hertz at the main signal itself. In the beginning, from what you can read, it was actually the other way around. You had the 2000 hertz in place of the 500 hertz and the 500 hertz at the main signal, but somehow they found out that under adverse conditions the 2000 hertz signal carries better than the 500 hertz signal, so they switched it, and from very early on you had this distinction with 1500 and 2000 hertz. Yeah, and so you can tune your LC circuits to the frequency in question, and then only in this circuit on the train device that is corresponding to the tuning of the LC circuit in the track magnet, you will have a significant change in the amperage in this coil and in the circuit. And this can be measured by some sort of electrotechnical device in the train installment. And in the beginning it was some sort of a relay that then just let go as soon as the amperage dropped, because there was all of a sudden an LC circuit that picked up the electromagnetic field, induced a current, and so the current here dropped, and this was detected and then set in motion more switching and relays on the train, so that the driver had to react to it. So that is the big idea about the system that is still in use in PZB 90, even though the devices might have been changed and made more modern, so that we don't actually have 3 currents anymore, but only 1, and we don't have relays anymore, but other devices that check for the changes in the amperage here on the train circuit here. And that the big advantage is that we do not need to put current and power to our track magnets. They can work without a cable serving them. The only thing that we need to be able to switch them on and off, and for that we have a deactivation switch. As soon as we close that switch, that capacitor is shortcut and then we don't have a resonating circuit anymore, and then we don't have the effect. And again, fail-safe idea: if for whatever reason the switch is broken, then the magnet is on. So we have a false on magnet rather than a false off magnet for safety reasons. And the big idea is we have the energy on the train. If the energy gets lost on the train, then we have a problem. Then it just does not does not work anymore. But we don't need a power supply for our magnets in the track. They work without active power supply. And that is more or less the system that we still have. And then we need a gadget to make it able to pass an active 2000 Hertz magnet. Like, for example, we have a broken one that is falsely on all the time. So we need to be able to pass it. And for that we have very early on the Befehlstaste, the override key. Then it switches from an immediate penalty brake to speed control to 40, else penalty brake. This indicator came later. Actually, in the beginning we will see that in our train here we do not have this Befehl 40 white indicator, but in a later system then it was added. But the functionality was there before. You can override the 2000 Hertz penalty brake by holding down the Befehlstaste, the override key. But for that you need authority, obviously, or you need like an SH1 on your main signal or an ASAT signal. What also was there quite early in the beginning was the release option, so that you can release from an ongoing monitoring by pressing the release key, in case that you can see that your signal is upgrading and you don't need all that control anymore. How this worked in the earlier versions of this system is a bit of an enigma. What the operating rules were for that, we have talked about with the release. Is it technically possible? Are you allowed to do it according to operating rules? And thirdly, does it actually make sense to release? How those rules were for, and how the technical possibilities were under Indusi I-60. If someone knows that, that'd be actually great for the comments. I know that there was this functionality to release, but the actual implementation and the conditions when it was possible to release and when it was allowed to release might have changed over the years. So that is the principle of PZB Indusi, and at the same time the Indusi I-60 system, how it is implemented at the game at this point. A second slide for those versions, and now I'm coming back to you, Theodorus. What was used in the two German states between the end of World War II and the reunification in 1993. The first beginnings of this system date back to 1919, when it was discussed for the first time probably that we could have this induction-based train protection system, and from what you can read in 1927 were the first tests made, and in 1934 the first system was actually used in actual operations, called Induktive Zugsicherung at this time. And this is where the name comes from, Indusi. Actually, you would think it is Indusi, but for whatever reason they used the Indusi and not Indusi. So they picked those syllables and left the Zug, the train, away. Later, this system, Induzusi suspect, somehow they did not want the Zu in it. Retrospectively, this system then was called the I-34, the Indusi 34 system, and I have tried to find out a bit more about what the system actually provided, and did not come up with too much. That was still in the German Reich, just after World War I, and in the time between World War I and World War II. Deutsche Reichsbahngesellschaft was the company that was running the trains in the German Reich at the time. And then came all the unpleasantness of the Nazi time and the World War II, ending in 1944 with everything being dysfunctional in terms of train running and train protection system, and also marked then a bit later the end of the German Reich. In 1947, war was over for 2 years at this time, from what you can read in the Western Germany, the Federal Republic of Germany. They started to, it did not exist then, but in the western part, so that is the occupation zones in the west, the British, French and American occupation zones, they started using their old stuff, their Indusi magnets and installations again, try to get it working again. In 1949 we had then the founding of the two German states, the Federal Republic of Germany and the German Democratic Republic. And in the Federal Republic of Germany we had Deutsche Bundesbahn as a successor to the Deutsche Reichsbahngesellschaft, more or less. And here, and on the other side, we had the German Democratic Republic that kept, for whatever reason, the name Deutsche Reichsbahn. I've never understood why a more or less socialist state has a Reichsbahn. But those are the peculiarities of history sometimes. And they kept the name Deutsche Reichsbahn through the whole time of its existence. Whereas in Western Germany, it was the Deutsche Bundesbahn, DB, at this time. And in 1945, they set a standard for the Indusi to use it again, and were using it first on the fast-running trains, then later on the whole net. It was updated in 1960 to Indusi I-60 standard, what then was the standard to be for the next 30 years, more or less. The differences between Indusi I-54 and Indusi 60, I have not been able to come up with a lot of definite information about that, unfortunately. Whereas in the eastern part, what is the Soviet occupational zone, and then the German Democratic Republic, also starting in 1949, Indusi and train protection was not actually really used. They, from what you can read, they took all the installations and put them in a bunker and hoped that it will still be working as soon as they needed them. In the 1970s, then they started to activate it again. A lot of it was broken though, and they imported some of the Western Indusi 60 stuff, and also from Romania, from what you can read, the I-60 ICRED stuff. Also, again, I don't know a lot about the technical implementation, or whether it was a system of its own or just copying the Western German stuff at this point. At any rate, in the 1980s, in the German Democratic Republic, they came up with a train protection system that is called PZ80, what was a lot more advanced than the Indusi 60 in terms as that you, for example, can set controlled speeds by the increments of 10 kilometers per hour and stuff like that. And this was the time when something like microprocessors came up, and the introduction of microprocessors made it possible to calculate brake curves, essentially, and have an ongoing speed control in the target speed control phase according to a brake curve that is constantly diminishing speed that is allowed, and as long as the train is going faster, then you can activate a penalty brake. What is great, because then you are not only relying on 2 points on the approach, but control it along the brake curve. Yeah, that was also already in the PZ80 system. Whereas in the West, around the same time in the 1980s, LZB came up, and the instruments for LZB, like the LZB 80 installation, they were also able to process the Indusi signals and run the Indusi Betriebsprogramm on their computers. And here we also have the possibility to use microprocessors and calculate brake curves. And later the I60 equipments was also updated by microprocessor controls and brake curve controls to the I60R. What R is for something like Rechner unterstützt, like computer aided stuff. So at this point we had systems that were using microprocessors, and we can make a proper brake curve control. And then came more or less the reunification in 1993. You had 1989 already the Berlin Wall and all that stuff going on. In 1993 then the Bundesländer in the east were well joined the Bundesländer in the west, and we had a continuing Federal Republic of Germany, now internationally abbreviated as GER, no longer FRG, and the German Democratic Republic as such stopped existing. At the same time, the Deutsche Bundesbahn and Deutsche Reichsbahn merged, and well, together with privatization, we ended up with the Deutsche Bahn. Oh yes, I've been looking for freedom, says Theodorus, and David Hasselhoff, of course, Spectre. Yes, yeah. So some things in the 80s are not so are not so super worthy of remembering, but yeah, we've all been there. Yeah, and then in 1994, shortly after merging those two thingies, the PZB 90 system was developed, where picking up the stuff that we can do with those microprocessor enhanced systems, merging it into a Betriebsprogramm that we know now as the PZB 90, and what we have a load of videos about how to operate it and how it works. Also, the restricted mode was added for the first time. It did not exist before that. And yeah, after that came software updates, and as soon as our stuff is running on microprocessors and we do not really have to hardwire it in relays and capacitors and whatever, we can change the behavior of the system more easily by updating the software, at least in principle. And like the 1.6, 2.0, and then some fringe cases were changed, and then also the speeds and times and the brake curve calculation and stuff like this has been changed over time, but the system is still the same. One exception is like on vehicles like the Baureihe 465, we kept the Indusi system, but at a certain point it was mandatory to run the PZB 90 system or equivalent system on the main lines in Germany, and so the I60 system was enhanced or modified for an I60M system on the Baureihe 465, what is more or less an Indusi system that works with very low speeds, only like PZB U setting, and makes up with very low speeds for the functionality that it does not provide compared to PZB 90 for those slow running shunters like the Baureihe 465. And this is a system called Indusi I60M. What is different from the PZB 90, and from what I can see, this is the only surviving Indusi system in terms of when you look at the directives that the DB Infra GO AG provides. And then obviously we all know came ETCS and ETCS Level NTC, National Train Control. The PZB 90 together with the LZB ended up as a Class B system. Legacy systems that were more or less fed into the ETCS environment, so that we can run the same system emulated on ETCS train equipment until ETCS is more or less on all the routes that we need. So let me check if that is something important what just came in here at this point. Well, we'll take to this later. And then, quite interesting for me at any rate, if you look at the directives that the DB Infra GO provides on its side, you can find the Richtlinienfamilie 483 with dot and different versions, and those tell you how to operate the train control systems that are in use and that you can use when you want to run a train. And the 483.0101 is more or less the basic rules for it, what applies to all the implementations. The A01 is how to build the stuff on the tracks, so the Streckeneinrichtungen you can find there. And then you can find directives for all the installations that are still allowed to run PZB 90, Bauformen. And then you can find rules for surviving I60R train installations, and there is a thing that is I60ER24, what is like a version of the prior I60 systems that are enhanced with an additional computer chip, and for that you can find it, for example, in the 483.0111. On the stuff that the Deutsche Bahn got from the German Democratic Republic, the PZ80 systems were upgraded to PZ80R systems, and you can find how to use them and how to get train data, especially into those systems, and this directive. Same here for the old LZB 80 I80 or LZB 80E I80 or the EBICAP 2000 DES systems. There is a special directive for that. And then for the more modern systems that are more or less totally computer controlled, the EBICAP 500, then you have the 114 for that. And for ETCS and how to use this level with the PZB LZB, you find in the 483.0701 for ETC. 403.02 are the directives controlling LZB, Linienförmige Zugbeeinflussung. 403.03 is for GNT. That is more or less what is covered here. So there are a lot of directives if you go to the DB Infra AG site, but they are all in a certain systematic order, and with this background you can also know where it is coming from. But the connecting thing for all those systems here, they all run PZB 90, so they are all added with the caption I60R system PZB 90, for example, or PZ80R system PZB 90. The only thing that stands out is the I60M on, for example, the Baureihe 465, where you have a special directive here, the 0.0101A03 for using this. So this is, I hope Theodoros is answers your question about how it was in Western and Eastern Germany and what systems were used at this time. And if you want to read it up, read those directives. It's quite interesting. It's quite detailed about what the different indicators show in what situations and how you get your train data into those computers and stuff. So super interesting, and they are actually in the game. I've tried to find together some pictures of it, and for example in the 766 Steuerwägen you can find this behind your driver's seat. You can find the I60R screen, and with the sticker telling you that it is PZB 90 version 2.0 that this system is running here. On the Karlsruher Kopf you find PZB I60 ER24. So this is this Bauform, this installation here that is running here, again with PZB 90. This you can find on the Expert 101 locomotive in the older version, the MFA version, and this is, if you can read it here, an LZB 80 system that comes from here. And this is what it looks like if it is a locomotive that was built in the German Democratic Republic running the PZ80R system, PZB 90. This is the Dateneinsteller for this, and you can see what stuff you have to actually put into this computer to run your PZB 90 system properly. And this is what it looks like on the Bavaria 465. So I actually spoiled the quiz that was connecting with that, while within other locomotives you can only see what software version is installed on this locomotive or has been retrofitted. So that was the 766.2 cab car. Here it is obviously the 463 car here. This is the Baureihe 101. This is the Baureihe 143, for example. Baureihe 465. And this I got from the Baureihe 111, where the PCB was retrofitted, and it gives you the number of the software update here. Alright. That's it for today with the presentation, I think. And we can go back to running our train. I found that actually quite interesting. Unfortunately, you don't get really a lot of hard data about how those systems worked over time, because you can find more or less general descriptions, but if you want to know what were the times and the speeds that were controlled, okay, sure, says Theodorus, but I'll leave the reading finding details to you, the reasons I subscribed. Yeah, great. Well, you never know. Sometimes you find a source that you have never thought about, and then all of a sudden you find, aha, great. But for our purposes in the game, I think this gives us enough to enjoy our experience. And it is always interesting to see how things develop and how the problems are the same all over the world and in different environments, and the solutions differ, and everywhere on the world people are coming up with interesting solutions and great ideas. What is the dog doing on the couch? Kara, what are you doing? Are you alright? Ah, obviously just bored. Here's a crocodile in blood orange, bloody orange. What is the official name of this color, if I'm not mistaken? So, white candy is a CD radar. Ah. Ah, nice. If you use this to close the doors, then those doors are still open and you have to close it by hand. Nice touch. Why the doors are still flapping when you're on the inside, I don't know. Where is the color white candy used instead of bloody orange? Oh no! I almost on cars. I see. I almost rolled backwards here. mustn't release your Zusatzbremse too early. Are we limited here to anything? No. We can leave with 60. And even faster, if I remember correctly. So sometimes those traction motor coolers work on their own automatically, but you can also force them with this switch. So let's see that we get some speed. That was obviously not the nicest driving. With switching it off. All of a sudden. And if you look at our indicators, we have 85 instead of 95 instead of 85, what we are typically used to. 75 what we are used to, and 60 instead of 55 what we are used to. We have no red lamp for the 500 Hertz, and we have no white befehl 40. How far until we have to slow down a bit? And now we're crossing over to Austria. Here's the 60 announced. Here's the 60. Here's a very short section where we can go 80, but the limit of 70 is already introduced, and we're getting a Austrian prepared to slow down to 40 signal. At this point here, here's the 70 that was announced. So what trains actually can go 80 in this short spot, I am not sure. And now we're getting closer to the border crossing and the checkpoint at the border crossing for the cars. And we get The neutral section announced, we have seen that 2 weeks ago, that very often, here's the Austrian 60, and here's the border crossing checkpoint. This is what it looked like. And then you probably had to stop like this guy here. And the Grenzschutz was checking you. Can even see how fast you are allowed to go in Austria. 130 on motorways. We have that for Germany as well. Yes, then we will see that for motorways the limit is quite uniquely. Ah, here they got it correct. Them their thing. The world famous no limit Autobahnen in Germany. They also give you an advised 130. Open the main circuit breaker. Roll through the neutral section. Can actually see it on the zap and zap. This was the neutral section. You can see it on this. Oops. On this gauge here. Flop, flop. And now we're almost stalling. Train line again. And we can go 170 from here. But we have to stop in Scharnitz. Oh, see, the radar wrote a long message. I will have to stop the train first. Hilfe! Alright. What did he say? From my own experience, that is only on the U-Bahn, some noticeable movements caused by driving are not so noticeable from the passenger's perspective. We have places on our line where the ATO on the PA 135 has the wrong coding, and when driving downhill, when it brakes a little all the time, it will accelerate for a short while. At one point before it starts braking again, and from the driver's perspective it's quite a jerk, but when riding as a passenger it's hard to estimate that place. Ah, interesting. Maybe the cars are cushioned off much more than you would think. The other day I actually witnessed an emergency brake or a penalty brake or something like this on a subway train. That was quite a jerk. Shortly after leaving the station, zack. Don't know what was the issue there. This one is an interesting signal. It's the only time we come by one here, so I want to show you. Anyone already know? Does anyone already know what that signal is for? It is a Gruppenpfeiftafel. So without this thing on the top, without those two lines, red, white posts or signs with this pointed hat are the equivalent of a P sign. So you have to blow your horn or your whistle. And with this additional thing, you have to blow your whistle repeatedly until you get to the Pfeifendetafel. And that allows you to stop blowing your horn. So we are blowing our horn. And proof of the pudding. We are in Austria now, and now it's Halt für Schubfahrten. So again, well done, TSG. What is that for? That is actually the Austrian equivalent for the snowplow signals. Also, some similar signals with just a bar and since we do not have a snowplow, not our thing. So why do we have this Gruppenpfeiftafel here? Because there are quite a lot of level crossings and we're just sounding the horn for all of them in one piece. And I think here you get the Pfeifendetafel. Here, that's the Pfeifendetafel. Now you can stop whistling. And now we're going uphill to Seefeld in Tirol. This is the Wetterstein Gebirge. This too. And on the other side we have the Karwendel. Now a broadside and an Almdudler. Well, I join you with the broadside, but not with the Almdudler. Theodorus, I wonder out the property prices along that whistling area. Yep. We have to ask Pocket Snickers. He's always reporting how he can hear the American trains whistling their 14L patterns. But I guess that was a normal whistling post. But I guess you don't need to be too worried about the property prices in this area. So this is, what's it called, Griesbach or something like this? Giesenbach, yeah. Past Griesbach, Griesenbach. There will be a drop to 60 in line speed. Didn't even turn it on. So, this is where the drop to 60 happens. Here. And Seefeld is again like the grading point. Until we get to Seefeld, we're running uphill, and from Seefeld we're more or less descending into the Inntal until we get to Innsbruck. Conquering those mountains are marvels of the past, says Theodoros. Our current time is digging through and making tunnels. Future making maglev more accessible, I guess. We will see what the future will bring. Best news about the future is, or would be, that there actually is a future that more or less keeps up all those benefits of accessible transit for more or less everyone. And Germany sold its maglev, which now runs between Shanghai and Pudong Airport. Yes, they sold it to China. Since Mr. Stoiber was not able to convince people of his Transrapid idea. Yes, Spectre, I know. There's a great interview with him talking about Mr. Stoiber, where he explains getting on a train in Munich Hauptbahnhof and going to the airport, but he mixes it up all the time. Yeah, this is one of the all-time classics of Bavarian politics. Sie steigen also in den Hauptbahnhof ein. And Theodore says, yes, it's still too expensive at the moment. So at any rate, we made it to Seefeld in Tirol. I mean, the recent current high-speed trains don't run 450, 500. He says all the time is not because we don't have the technologies, but the overall cost doesn't make sense. Yeah, probably. That is most probably true. And for the umpteenth time, I should not read the chat until the train has come to a proper stop. Those cars look funny. Looks like the IKEA Express. Beautiful bright wood. Oh, wrong side. My Arbeitsmappe about the 111 says you always have to put it to strong, never to weak. Alright, and now let's start the descent. We have to stop at right. Not right im Winkel, but right by Seefeld. So, and now we're getting into the descent. Ooh, Right. And on the downhill run, we'll have to stop at Hochzierl. Speed limit wise, you don't have to think too much, because starting at Scharnitz or Giesenbach, actually, it's more or less always 60. Now the tunnels start. There goes my camera. There's a Leiten, there's a couple of stopping points on the downhill run. It's nice that the services don't stop at all of them. It's always a bit of a different pattern. It's interesting to watch the brake blending. Are my graphics setting all maxed out? They are maxed out as what is possible by the in-game control. I have even a bit more stuff running buy some engine ini tweaks. But there, with the engine ini tweaks, you could do a bit more. And this is where I try to balance it with the FPS a bit. But it depends a lot on the weather and the lighting. Whether it works or not. What I said before, it's always nice to see how the loco blends the air brakes and the electric brake. How the e-brake takes over completely after a while at speeds like this. Alright, expect 40 before we get to Hochziel. So we don't have any air in the brake cylinders on the locomotive, they're only using the e-brakes here. But obviously in the cars the train is braking with air, even though we don't see that. Isn't that gorgeous? That not so much. Got to make sure not to stall the train completely here. Before we get to Hochziel. I wonder what that means, Hochziel. Oh no, I overdid it. I have to go further. I thought I have to stop in front of the level crossing. But I have to go on. What I don't know actually is on what side I have to open the doors in a situation like this. Probably on the right side here. Spectre, any ideas what this Hochziel what a Ziel, what kind of a word Ziel is. I only know something like a little screwdriver in Austrian. A Schraubenzieher. No, unfortunately not. Maybe some kind of tree or wood or something, probably. Quite often those place names are connected with something in nature. So, oh, we have to stop at Allerheiligenhöfe. That is one of those stopping points that you don't always stop at. Hochziel is called Hochziel because it is above Ziel. But Wikipedia does not say why Ziel is called Ziel. Alright. Thank you for checking it out. So, this is maybe the longest tunnel. And it's a long stream tonight, actually. We are already past 10. But well. It's only a little bit to go to Innsbruck. And I wonder why OBS is always... Sifa. Why OBS is always losing time. According to OBS, I have streamed for 1 hour and 48. This is why my video for the DTG Ambassador event actually got a bit longer than the time that I was allocated. Marty McFly again, yeah. The space-time continuum is a bitch. So, I think at the end of this tunnel there is a bit of a blotter in the copy book. Yes, here, look at this. Such a good job on this route, and then beeps! A broken tunnel. I hate it when this happens. the Inntal. Oops, good thing I switched back in time to not miss the Halt erwarten here. Ah, what did he write? By the way, Kranebitten is called Kranebitten because of the old German word Hranavitu, which means juniper. Oh. No, I did not know that before. Unfortunately, juniper is not here today. Kranebitten. Yeah, this is where we still have to pass more or less now or soon. 2.5 miles, kilometers. So, gotta be a bit careful. At the end of this double S here, I think there is a signal. And according to the distance signal, it is supposed to be at stop. It's a bit tricky because it's around the corner, but you can see those indicators plates. Signalankündigung. Carefully around the corner. In case the signal is actually red, but it is not. That's already Innsbruck, where you can see there. Allerheiligen Höfe. The passing area. Those passing areas also have some group exit signals, where sometimes this signal Fahrwegende is your stopping board. Very nice presentations, CD Radar. Thank you. Limited to 60 by the signal for whatever reason, since the line speed is 60 all the time. This area here is especially heavy on the FPS. With this frame rates, they better include the LSS FSR in Train Sim World 6, yes. Or I have finally to buy a newer computer. Ah, I like it. This is the crossing that we whistled for, I guess. This is Bitten. Or is Juniper Station. Babe. Sneaked over the limit. So, now I have to prepare for the stop at Allerheiligenhöfe, All Hallows Ranches. This is not a whistle post, it is not white, red, white, it is white, black, white. And this just tells us that we just hit the axle counter for the upcoming level crossing. And Theodoro says it is indeed a very beautiful DLC though. Kinda glad they didn't cut more corners than this. Yeah. It is a beautiful DLC. So where is my brake? Ooh. Should have slowed down a bit earlier. Inspector says TSG makes some scenic stuff near the Towelbahn is also very cool and relaxing and also quite heavy on the FPS, and I think this is the downside, that they make it so such great scenery. Yeah, I just made it like this, just at the platform. They should revisit left Rhine though. There they cut some corners in terms of traction. I only have the left Rhine on my Steam installation. You're in luck, doors are in the middle, says the radar. Yes, I was very lucky that I don't have a door at the end of my car. So, Innsbruck Hütting, we stop. And we're getting a Halt erwarten again. The users learn from KCD2 that game is basically Forest Simulator, but sadly that's on completely different engine, yeah. And CD Radar likes it because it is 50-50 German and Austrian. Yeah, this is what I like it. That's what I like as well very much. I wish more maps are like that. Well, okay, signal is no longer red at any rate. We don't need to brake. Can let it roll. Passing this residential block on the left with those stacked apartments. And now my FPS is really going southwards, probably because my computer has to calculate this crocodile on top of everything. So stop at Hütting, and there is another crocodile waiting at the platform. Not like Salzburg, the city right where we have only a couple of meters in Austria, but it is a nice station, yeah. Inspector says we need more locos with animal names. Well, then you should like the Polish ones, right? The Swinia, the big. All the farm is on the rails. The CRRC bisons, as Theodoros, yes. Il coccodrillo. So now I'm too slow again. Because this platform here is super long for such a small station. Well, yeah. Just started late. It's all good. This is where we came from. Out of those massive mountains. What I really like is the delay in those door closing. So, I think we broke it. Expect 40. Across the inn. The frame comes back, yeah. Well, it totally depends on where you're looking, in what direction. Now here it is just bad, but sometimes it makes a huge difference in what direction you're looking. So slow down to 40 here. Because we have to cross a switch that is limited to 40. We stop at Westbahnhof too. Yeah. That's the downside of a busy yard. Even if it's not so busy, but with two of those crocodiles in the area, or even three, it just slows things down. But on the other hand, I had runs with a different lighting, and they were smooth. Still interesting to know what exactly makes the difference here. So here, for example, we are at 21. And then it's like a Geiger counter in the other direction. It is getting lower. Tick. Alright. Last bit to the main station. Isn't there a ski jump that ends in a cemetery? I would not know that. In Innsbruck? Die Bergiselschanze. Suspecte. Ah. And again I switched it. To run up permanently and didn't pay attention. This is why in real life the run up does not stick. So that idiots like me can't accelerate the train just by looking at the landscape. It's not speed that is dangerous, it is the sudden stop. That is true. Here at Innsbruck Hauptbahnhof there are sometimes some weird shunting signals that stop you even though there is no Signalnachahmer connected with them. Don't know if that is as it is supposed to be. So it feels like we're getting a bit more boost back. So going into one of those bay platforms as it seems. And they want us to go all the way. So here we are. That background, Theodorus, yeah. Innsbruck. And from here We could go further on along the Inn until we finally get to Rosenheim, actually. There are lots of places. I'm just mentioning Rosenheim because it's in the other DLC. That's it for all my bumpy riding. At least we got a medal. Guys, it's been a long stream for today. Thank you so much for bearing with me. I hope you enjoyed my little dip into the historics of the Indusi system, now known as PZB. Spectre says, nice stream. Thank you, Tiger. See you next time. Guys, thank you. And Theodore says, nice stream. I don't know if I can next week. See you all. Thing is, next week, most probably, there will be no live stream on Sunday night because of this ambassador event that has been announced but not completely fixed about the schedule. So maybe you can see me at this time on the Trains in World official channel with a pre-recorded video. So but we will see what they come up with. If not, then I will stream normally. And if everything goes as it is planned, then there will be instead a video about me running a train, surprisingly, on the Trains in World channel, in connection with other ambassadors doing their stuff before and after. So, like videos of a couple of ambassadors, like in the days after the roadmap, but I think they will announce it, what is actually being done. But I most probably I will be not able to stream at my usual slot. Anyway, enough of these weird explanations, guys. I will have to go to bed. See you soon, and have the greatest of times. Bye bye.